This time the Chinese players actually cooked and innovated new decks. In the first 3 days of January 2026, they had 11 city challenges. I'm gonna show you all the winners and also talk about the most interesting decks from the top 8. Let's go! When it comes to the actual metagame in this week, we had seen absolute dominance by Draven, winning 9 out of 11 of the city challenges and posting 38 top 8s, but also the 10th was being won by a Fiora, 11th by a Kai'Sa. On top of that, there was also one bonus tournament, a little bit smaller one, but won by a really spicy Sivir. So let's start with the Nanjing City Challenge. That was won by a Draven, of course. As I said, 9 out of 11 were won by Draven, but this is not your typical Draven. This Draven is made out of 10 Chaos runes and 2 Fury runes. Essentially, this deck is a Nocturne deck that also on the other side has the potential consistency of a Draven deck because you are drawing so many cards. So you have from the 3 locations, you have 2 that directly can enable Nocturnes, and that's Conservatory and the Candlelight Sanctum. Third one is Zone Warrens, because why not, right? And then we have the main core of the deck. As you can see here, it's no power on the red apart from the actual Draven character, the champion unit. This is why you only have 2 Fury runes here. Maybe you could think about using 3, but overall 2 is fine. If you play the Draven, you probably don't play it even on 4 resources unless your draw is really bad, so the 2 Fury runes are not a problem. Then the rest of the deck is like pure purple when it comes to the powers. Now, what is very interesting is that this Draven doesn't even play the signature equipment from Draven. So essentially, it just plays Edge of Night instead of it, which is incredibly interesting. I'm assuming that's because they wanted to play some hidden cards as well, so the Fight or Flight and the Switcheroo to be like among them, alongside the Titan as well. So there's a little bit more bluffing potential, and he didn't find more slots to play the signature spinning axis from Draven. But overall, this deck is packed to gills with content. Like, you have a lot of potential synergy here. Battering Ram can be played even as early as 2 resources if you have some ridiculous hand with like multiple Seals of Discord and cold shots and so on. So that's a possibility. You can also remember, Nocturne does count as a played card, right? So you have a possibility there as well. And overall, you're able to just dump a really huge amount of pressure starting from like turn 1, turn 2, doesn't matter if you go first or second. And then when you're running out of steam, you have the last rights as a potential tool to get some units back. Now, you will see future, like there are gonna be other forms of this deck in the future, but this one is actually pretty neat. And the shell of the Draven allows you to have a bigger hand than you should have with a deck like this. The one thing I don't like in this Draven deck is that the fact that it only plays 1 Rebuke, and I feel like that's probably the most important card in the format right now, because it just essentially shuts down so many archetypes that this deck could actually have troubles. So like very big units, El Presidente kind of deck, or some set decks, right, that you have to have an answer, and Rebuke just shuts them down completely. I'm still not sold on the Edge of Night instead of the spinning axis, but maybe you in the comment will be able to enlighten me why would I play Edge of Nights instead of spinning axis here. But overall, super spicy deck for sure, 100% fun to play, and very cool to see some completely new stuff coming out of the Chinese tournaments here. But you thought the Draven from the first place was cooking? Look at this Annie from the 4th place in the same tournament. It's a full purple Annie deck. It's essentially the same type of idea. We're playing a Nocturne Battering Ram deck that is, instead of the Draven, play Annie, so you have more possibilities of having interaction during your opponent's turn because you're playing a low resource deck. So it's completely opposite from the Draven, even though they play similar idea, right? We have the Seal of Discourse, we have the Last Rides, Cold Shots, all of the same stuff here, but Annie is more aggressive, more in the face, because she needs to win the game as soon as possible. And I played this deck a little bit, super fun to play. Super fun. Like the Ezreal drawing infinite amount of cards. You could think about maybe playing scrap heaps here, and in the sideboard you can actually find those, but the deck is just so oppressive when your hand aligns. It's kind of like a casino deck, but not exactly. Now this deck also plays Obelisk of Power. I didn't make like super like calculations about which one is actually better. Is it Obelisk of Power or Sanctuary? Because Sanctuary will be affecting here I think 15 spells. It's 3, 5, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 spells. Yeah. So there's a high chance of drawing cards and revealing Nocturnes as well with a Sanctum, but Obelisk of Power allows you to do more consistent turns, like turn 1 Battering Ram is gonna be more consistently happening with Obelisk of Power than without it. Now the question is how important that is, but at the same time this deck plays more Rebukes and Gusts, so you have the chance to battle the downside of someone having Obelisk of Power with you, because you can just put that unit back in the hand if you really want it, right? So really like this deck. I think it's super fun to play. I totally recommend checking it out because it's something different, and there's so many weird sequencing that you have to do to be very efficient with this. In this top 8 we also had a Darius that was not playing a baited hook, so I'm not gonna fully focus on this deck because I do feel like this deck should just be a Rek'Sai instead of a Darius, because the only reason to play Darius here over Rek'Sai is the ability to have Darius in your opening hand, essentially the Trifarian, right? And potentially having more mana, but this deck is not seem to be built like you want to really just exploit the Legion access to 1 energy every turn. And other than that, you have Noxian Guillotine, right, instead of the Rek'Sai drawing engine. So it's like, I'm not certain. This is just a straight up aggro deck in red and yellow. I don't know if this is just better than Rek'Sai. My initial gut reaction would be no, this is not better than Rek'Sai, because Rek'Sai can just play more aggressively and doesn't have to worry about running out of steam, while this deck has to play Kai'Sa because otherwise you're very low on card draw. That's why even the Rally the Troops is here, and you don't probably want to use the Hidden Blade ever on your own units because you are a aggro tempo deck, so you have to use the Hidden Blade to most likely secure the win. So yeah, just wanted to show you this because it's interesting, but I don't think it's a very good deck. Also in this top 8 there was an Azir deck that is not really like super different from the previous Azir that I shown in the video, but it does play 1 tasty Fey Folk, which is basically like an accelerated engine for your equipment to have more use, right? It's also a decent target for your Death Grip because you will channel runes and draw instantly and then give a lot of potential might to one of the other units, so that's pretty nice. And maybe you should consider playing more Fey Folks in the future in an Azir deck because of that potential combo over here with the equipment and the Death Grip. But overall, it's just your standard Azir deck with Grand Stratagems though instead of Under Titans, because I see people are going back and forth on those, and that's about it. The 8th place Victor is a more classical Victor that we've seen in set 1 already. So this is just has an inclusion of the Honest Brokers and card shops on top of the Zhengzhou and Plundering Portal. So quite a lot of the cards from the early game is just completely exchanged, right? Because those cards seem to be very efficient. And then you top it off with the new Bellows Breath to combo it with Imperial Decree, and you still have the top end of Thousand Tail Watchers. Now that's one of the 3 trajectories that a Victor deck can have nowadays, one being like the more classical like this one, the other one being full control with almost no units, or all no units, essentially all spells, or there's like a third one that is essentially the all control with all spells, but is playing Zhengzhou's and Jace's and Vanguard Armories to like get additional win conditions or early control with one of those units. So overall, this one is the more classical one, and I'm kind of surprised that it has some decent results over here in this tournament out of 117 players. At the same time, it is a best of 1, but it's cool to see Victor performing. Just when I was recording this video, Riftex added another tournament called Zijin Submit New Year event with 107 players to the database, and this one was again one of a very standard Draven, but the second place was actually another purple Draven. This one was with 12 Chaos Runes, so no way of generating red at all, but still has the red Draven. You know, you could think maybe in this case would be like to play the 6-drop Draven as a chosen champion instead of the red one. Probably maybe that direction for the future, especially if we were gonna add Ride the Wind to the deck, for example. But this one is fully like purple, right? You can still generate gold, by the way, with Draven, so you can still use that gold then for being red. But overall, the deck is all purple or no red power. Plays the Merchants, Titanus, Pauti Porous, of course, early for the aggression, and you have the Battering Rams, Nocturne, Engine, Cultures, everything else is the same. It's this one does though plays 3 Blood Rushes, still 1 Rebuke, so I'm not certain how to think about that, but overall this is really aggressive deck that I feel like could be a potential threat in best of 3s as well. And in the same tournament, we had an Azir on the 3rd place, funnily enough, with 2 tasty Fairfolks that I was just talking about that maybe you should play more, but it has another interesting addition, which is the Fiora. The Fiora over here essentially makes it possible to be boosted by so many pieces of equipment in this deck that it makes sense to have her. We have 3 Doran's Shield, which instantly trigger Mighty because it gives +1. You have the BF Swords, you have the Brutalizer, which doesn't have to be even equipped in the same turn. So I very much like this Azir probably the most out of all of the Azirs that I have seen so far. It's pretty interesting deck, has the 3 Death Grips, and has potential like upsides of a lot of might, like high might pushes with singular units, which is a little bit different than what people expect when they play against an Azir deck. Now we're swapping to Beijing City Challenge, which had quite a top 8. Let's say like this: 5 Dravens, 4 of them finishing in top 4, 2 Irelias, and 1 Ezreal. The 1st place Draven is more or less very standard, has though most of its card in 3 copies, which is nice to see. So you have access to like a full consistent build of a Draven. I feel like this is, if you want to try out Draven, this is a pretty good just copy paste that you would just like to try in the arena to see how it plays out. The 2nd place though has some spice in it because it does sport a little bit more of the purple cards. This is why you see 7 purple runes instead of 6. We have Beast Below, which allows you to keep tempo on board, which is kind of interesting. Like allows you to also replay some of the maybe units that you would like to play back, like maybe Titan if you have that option, right? Treasure Hunter is not really that even powerful later on in the game, so if you don't need it anymore, you can bounce it back. Battering Ram is here as well, that can be replayed for cheaper. Same goes for Noxus Hopeful, so there's some synergy over here. And Beast Below is pretty strong tempo play that maybe a deck like Draven kinda needs to, because it is kinda like a rebuke when you think about it, but not exactly, right? And it doesn't have to be on the battlefield, which is very important in a type of deck like this. So this is also pretty consistent deck, but it does play 3 Seals of Discord, which makes it a little bit harder on the value of your opening hand. All the Irelias from this tournament are essentially either following the full El Presidente type of build that has just like 4 creatures, or is like a mix of early 2-drops with Poros, Titans, Treasure Hunters, and a Herder to essentially have a little bit more of early presence, but it still finishes the game with the Irelia or the big Draven together and cheat out points. So yeah, I like boosts of swiftness in Irelia in general. It allows you to be way more consistent with the big Draven as well. So it is a good deck. Like, it does deliver a lot of results also in China. I'm not certain how it's gonna play out in a best of 3 type of events, but it is winning quite a lot of matches here in the Chinese metagame. And the 8th place in Beijing City was an Ezreal deck that is kind of like a discard deck, but not exactly. Like, it has similar functions to the Annie and Draven deck that are playing Nocturnes and so on. Like, it has the same kind of engine, but it plays Rasa, while the other purple Draven and Annie can also play, but they do have a lot more value when it comes to the potential use of the red color as well, right? Which this deck doesn't have, which is so interesting because they are very different playstyle decks, but they kind of want to do similar things. But Ezreal has this narrow, very narrow tunnel that they want to follow with, we need to play some worse cards like Stupefy, Frigid Touch, just to make sure that we can draw some cards with the Prodigal Explorer, right? So it is an interesting deck. I don't think it's a good deck, but I do think if you're like a really big fan of Ezreal, that's cool. But the problem is, like, you have this kind of deck that wants to draw a lot of cards, but yet you're cutting down your main character, which is the Ezreal Prodigy, which draws you so many cards because you have access to him once in your opening hand, essentially, right? But at the same time, why do you want to play a deck that draws cards and a legend that draws cards when instead you can do 2 different directions? Your deck does one thing and the legend does the other thing. That's why the Draven and the Annie decks, the purple red ones, that are also kind of this direction of like getting a lot of value of their draws and energy by playing some unfair mechanics, right? They get more potential value than an Ezreal deck because of the color combo and the two directions, two axes they can attack by having different legend powers when it comes to the direction this time. Shenzhen City Challenge with 128 players was being won by a Fiora deck. This tournament is pretty spicy. Fiora on the first, Victor, Draven, Azir, Draven, Rek'Sai, Kai'Sa, and that's about it. So let's take a look at the Fiora. What I like about this Fiora the most is the fact that this player chose to play free action. I think in this environment of best of one games, where so many decks are spotting equipment, free action in the main are just really bonkers, specifically in decks that play equipment themselves, so the action is just not a 4 might for 4 energy, right? And he will use the Weapon Master by his own merit because we play Doran's Blade, BF Swords, and so on. Now, otherwise, this deck is pretty cool, and I feel like if there will be a orange-yellow deck that is gonna be in the metagame, I think it's gonna be Fiora, just because of Riposte existing in this deck. Because if you wanna play Set, I think Set is a very good deck, but the problem is, against purple, you are absolutely demolished by rebukes, and Set can't really do much about rebukes unless it's gonna be a sabotage, right? But when it comes to Fiora, you have a chance to use the riposte, and that's why I even think you should probably use 3, even though when I was building Fiora myself, I was putting 2 of them because I was like, I don't need 3 counter spells. Probably you will actually have to do that because rebukes are just so disgusting when it comes to like using them against combination of colors that are like orange, yellow, and probably red to some degree as well, because when you play the 6-drop mech and you just get rebuked, you just kind of like, I guess I lose, you know? So this deck, this Fiora, is actually pretty cool, and I feel like as a metagame choice, it's better than Set. And it plays in a kind of similar fashion, but not exactly, right? I'm not sure why there are death grips in this particular Fiora, and maybe that is something that we could change for like additional copy of Hidden Blade and a riposte maybe, right? But also I'm not certain if Kato got the errata or not, because Kato right now can target himself, making him a deflect to 6 might on attack, right? But if there's an errata that he needs to target a different unit than himself, then he becomes way worse. But if he's not, then he's very playable. So that's interesting to see. And also remember, when he attacks, he triggers the Fiora instantly. So you have a lot of options when it comes to like triggering Fiora instantly here as well. And it's just an interesting deck. So yeah, I would try it out, although you have to pay attention to the Kato. I am not certain how exactly it works because we didn't get the English erratas yet. The second place Victor is the full control, but with a little bit of units, as in 2 Js and 2 card shops are here to create the gold for potentially a Vanguard Armory play early on in the game, right? And then in the sideboard, we have access to additional units if you want to swap out for some matchup changes. Also, you have the Chemtech Cask to also combo with the Js. At the same time, I feel like having 2 might end up being really bad draws in the late games. I'm not sure how I like 2 of them. Otherwise, it's just like your full control deck with the Bellows Breath. Oh, 2 pieces of Bellows Breath. I find this really surprising. I feel like having 3 Bellows Breath and 3 Imperial Decree is the core of this deck. So I'm not certain what to think about here, but it does play 1 Grand Stratagem to finish the game as well, if you really need that badly, that push with the might from all the units. So it's personally one of the decks that I'm looking forward to playing myself, potentially in Set 2. I'm not saying that this exact build, but something around this. So the third place Victor is different, but the same, kinda. Like it does only have 1 Jace and 1 Vanguard Armory, and I feel like Vanguard Armory is most important in mirror matches, right? Because you want to overwhelm your opponent with the amount of tokens that you have, and that Vanguard Armory really matters a lot in that position. But also plays Honest Brokers and Card Shops and Zhengzhou and Victor Leader as your chosen champion. Maybe this is a typo because otherwise you only have combo like of the Victor Leader with 8 units, right? While the other Victor gives you tokens while playing spells on the opponent's turn, which you want to definitely do. So this is an interesting choice. I'm not certain what to think about it. Maybe just a typo, right? In the sideboard, there's a Time Warp and 1000 Tail Watchers that would be used only in the finals. I don't think we have to think even about it. But it is another kind of a direction of the Victor potentially in the set too. The Azir from the top 8 is a little bit different than the other Azirs we already mentioned. This one plays Under Titans instead of Grand Stratagems. Otherwise, it's pretty similar to what we have seen already so far in the other Chinese tournaments. It does play 3 Death Grips, which, as I explained in one of the previous videos, is great to like kill one of your Weapon Master Sand Soldiers, because then you just essentially double your equipment's value, and you can just like get +6 out of 1 BF sword and transfer the value to another creature essentially, right? But other than that, pretty more and less standard, so not much to say about this deck. The top 8 Rek'Sai though, now that's an interesting deck because it does play Immortal Phoenixes, and the spells that can kill units to bring Immortal Phoenixes are plenty, I would say. You have Hidden Blades, you have Falling Stars, you have Call the Weak, you have Piercing Lights. All of those can bring your Immortal Phoenix back to life. And then on top of that, well, remember, it's a Rek'Sai deck that can play from top of the deck, right? So you have access to card draw. So playing 3 Seals of Rage is not a problem because you can replace your hand pretty easily with the Void Rush as well. So it's an interesting Casino Swarm deck. Like, I'm not certain how good this deck is. You also have Avai, which is okay, like sure, it's not a 2-drop, but it can be a lot of might when you are going into later stages of the game. And overall, it's an interesting deck. I feel like Rek'Sai is gonna be like a strong B tier, super inconsistent, but when it works, it just completely smashes the opponent. So it's probably like a not great user experience, because if you're dealing this, you could feel great, but your opponent feels miserable. So I'm not sure how much I like this type of deck being in the game, but yeah, pretty for sure fun to play if you're not just drawing horribly. And the last spot in that top 8 was a Kai'Sa that I just wanted to show you because it's a little bit different. Its full plan is to actually play on Time Warp, because look at what the units are playing. We have Card Traps, we have Plundering Poros, we have Premonition as well, right? So this is like huge card draw, but also generation of gold, quite a bit of it. So it seems like this person is just trying to get into Time Warp and win by Time Warping in most of the cases, which is just an interesting approach, because you still play units that are pretty strong, right? You have 1 Darius Trifarian, I don't know, 2 Ferris Forerunners, and I feel like maybe this should be reversed in a metagame where purple is so prevalent, because the rebukes are just horrible against Ferris Forerunners, right? But just wanted to show you this. I'm not saying this is like a Kai'Sa that I would like to play, but I just wanted to show you that it's an interesting approach. Now we're swapping to Yantai City Challenge, that in the top 8 had 4 Dravens. We had 2 Kai'Sas, 1 Master Yi, and 1 Fiora. The Draven from the first place is very standard, but it does play 2 Brainhairs in the main, which is definitely important for the mirror matches, right? And it also has a random Sky Splitter inside of it, which can catch people off guard, and 1 Angle Shot to just be good in the mirror as well. Although in current environment, Angle Shot might actually not be bad for a best of 1, because it does get some value for you yourself with the equipment that you have in your deck, but also can be potentially used to outplay reaction speed, like get your opponent's Spinning Eggs out of the unit and suddenly win the combat and still draw a card, right? So there's some potential over here. The Master Yi from the top 4 is a little bit different. It's a Trinity Force deck that I feel like will struggle quite a lot against purple decks, and the only way of winning against purple decks would be just literally just having a Ruin Runner on turn 3 like every single time. But that's gonna be hard to do because you don't have a lot of card draw, and also remember that just your typical purple decks can just run over Ruined Runner even if it has a lot of might. So this is like a mid-range deck that swapped out Kiana's for Novori Scouts, which I like very much because you don't have to pay the power cost anymore, but then you would like to have a payoff for playing a little bit more of an end game that this deck doesn't really have. The end game is literally Ruin Runner and the Master Yi that you have as chosen champion. But in the sideboard, there are 2 White Flame Protect. So I'm not certain, maybe this particular deck should play Kiana's instead of the Navori Scouts, right? Just because it doesn't support any more expensive endgame in the main board. And overall, those actions in the side, I think this is a mistake. And those actions should be in the main because you have Trinity Forces and Guardian Angels that you could utilize with him as well. So overall, interesting deck. I'm not certain how it got that high because of the ever-present purple color everywhere, and rebukes just absolutely demolish Master Yi. But yeah, good job. Now the top 8 Fiora, I'm not even certain why I'm showing you this, because this is ridiculous. Like, this card is playing a commander deck. Like, there's so many one-offs in this, it's crazy. The entire sideboard is 8 different cards. Then the main board has like, I cannot even, like, okay, I squeezed it and it can sit on the screen now. But it's like, I don't know, bro, why are we playing singular Leona? Why are we playing a singular Kiana, a singular Shen? Okay, Shen can be to some degree understandable, but it's like there's double yellow Fiora, the 3 drops, and 1 Fiora orange. Why just not cut those 4 drops and just be more consistent with yellow Fiora and the Jax, for example, right? Yeah, it's really weird. The spectral matrons here can essentially be played for first mates, I think. That's like the best target, possibly. So very weird deck, but in best of ones, I guess everything is possible. Now we swap into Xuzhou, I think, or Xuzhou City Challenge with 54 players, a little bit smaller. I mean, quite a bit smaller. It was won by Draven, no surprise. Then Kaisa, Annie, Draven, Seaver, Draven, and Master Yi. But there's some spikes in this tournament. So the first place Draven is your purple 10-2 Draven that plays the Nocturne, of course, and the entire engine about that. It does play Edge of Night and no spinning axis. I really don't know. Like, again, if you have a better idea than I with the temporary being a problem, then let me know in the comment. And overall, just plays your standard purple stuff otherwise, but it does play Scrap Heap, which the other purple Draven did not in the main. And I feel like I like the Scrap Heap in main here because you have so much synergy with Zone Warrens and the Traveling Merchant and the Ezreal. You're just getting so much value. At the same time, I feel like that's gonna be better in the Annie version of this deck rather than Draven, because Draven potentially has more card draw anyway. So maybe you would need more tricks in Draven than in an Annie deck, for example, right? But overall, this is a super interesting deck. Cool to see it performing again this week in China. The Annie from the first place is kind of weird because it does not play any Vice. It does have the purple big Draven, but also plays 0 stack decks, which I find shocking to say the least. It does have to bring here to play against into, like, you know, mirror matches and Draven decks that are trying to abuse the purple color against you, so that is smart. But like, it's kind of weird that you'd not play stack deck in this version of this end. You still have to ride the winds to play with the Draven, I guess. Like, that's your replacement for the Vi. So instead of going for the Vi route, you have one of the Dravens, the big ones. But also at the same time, why just not play both? You could play one Draven, one Vi, have the possibilities of 2 different, like, kind of directions that you can go with it, right? So I don't know, it's an interesting Annie deck. I don't feel like it's gonna be super consistent this way that it's being built, but it is interesting. The Sevier from the top 8 is a little bit interesting because it essentially swaps out Misfortune for an Aurora deck, and plays Treasure Trove and Cold Shots, because now Battle Mistress allows you to create a little bit of more value out of the Treasure Trove when it's killed, right? Because you ramp up and you draw, and Cold Shots can now be used with the gold that you generated with Battle Mistress, so that gives you a small edge on the card draw in this deck. But other than that, you kind of lose potentially while not playing an MF. You don't have access to the ganking that is actually really important to the Aurora decks when it comes to this form of purple and orange. And you do have a worse, in my opinion, a champion unit that doesn't really like benefit from what you want to achieve as a deck overall. You don't want to use this Sevier instantly, or you don't even want to use it like essentially at all, because your Accelerate is so important in this unit, right? So it's an interesting deck choice, but it does lack the Boots of Swiftness, in my opinion, to supplement the Seaver instead of MF swap, right? And overall, it's still an Aurora deck, which in theory should not perform in the metagame, but again, it's a best of one, and not everyone is playing Gearhead in the best of ones tournaments in China. The Master Yi from the top 8 is essentially a variation of the Master Yi that we already saw, with a little bit more on the mid-range side, with the White Flame Protector in the main, and then one action in the main while playing the Navari Scouts instead of the Kianas. That's essentially it. It's still the Trinity Force, Guardian Angel, Ruined Runa deck that should be demolished by purple color. Tianjin is another smaller city challenge with 53 players, again won by Draven, but in the top 8 we had a Master Yi and a set, and otherwise we also had 3 more Dravens and 1 Irelia. The winning Draven list is absolutely nothing interesting, so I'm just gonna focus on the second place Master Yi, who is essentially almost the same deck as the other Master Yis that I already shown today. It's the Ruin Runner Trinity Force deck, but with just a little bit different proportions. Still 1 dragon in the main, main, and we of course have 3 Navori scouts of instead of the Kianas, 1 first mate to have a little bit of the ability to like gang between with the Master Yi or like instantly attack into a location. Other than that, it's pretty standard. Again, very weak to purple in my opinion. And then on the 3rd place, we have again a deck that has really big problems with purple. This is a set deck that does play maximum 7 on curve, which is the Fey Dragon. I am not certain how often you actually get to 7 with this deck, because typically you would stop at 6. To circumvent that, probably you're playing the Bone Shiver over here to have more rune channel when it comes to getting to that 7th spot. But other than that, I feel like, and I expressed that when talking about the Fiora deck, that the Fiora deck has access to something to stop the purple color from rebuking you, right, with the riposts. Why this deck does have the showstoppers to be more aggressive, but what does it matter when you get rebuked or fight or flight all the time, right? So I'm not certain on what were the matchups here for this deck. I would love to see Set being playable, but it might be a rough time for him. Also, there's not a lot of ways of buffing your creatures here in this particular deck, while also plays 3 Death Grips in this deck. So this is very challenging, I would say, that you have to be very efficient with your buffs that are hard to place, because you have only Warmogs, you have the Sea Monkey, right? And you have the Showstoppers and the Pit Rookies, but that's it. You have no other way of doing the buffs, and I don't know if this is enough. Of course there's a Fate Dragon, right? But it doesn't matter because it's a 7-drop. So maybe instead of the 7-drop we should be using the Monk for 4 instead. Who knows? It's more, it has to be tested out. Now, Fuzhou City Challenge, 128 players. And again, this is the city that is gonna host the regional qualifiers in 2 weeks, so take that in mind, right? Had a top 8 of 4 Dravens and 4 Irelias, and not a single one of them was interesting. So the winning Draven list, it's very standard. It has nothing much to talk about. It has only 1 Bryn here, which is maybe questionable, maybe not, but it seems like it's one of those pivotal cards when it comes to playing mirror matches, right? But other than that, all of the decks are just variation of each other, and Irelias just are either the full VIP Le Presidente type of deck, or just has a little bit of 2 drops, and that's about it. They all play exactly the same otherwise. So completely uninteresting top 8 here in Fuzhou. Zhengzhou, I think that's how you read it, had a 62-player tournament won by Draven, but we had for the first time ever a Rumble in the top 8, a Renata, and also a Rek'Sai and Master Yi. The winning Draven list is completely uninteresting, but there are 3 actually facts that are more interesting about this deck. Is that it has 2 Brynhirs, which is nice to see, has last Ferris Ferranis because of the rebukes, right? Get absolutely wrecking your face if that happens. Plays 2 Spinning Axes, maybe he doesn't have the 3rd one or something, but it does play 1 Vi, which I very much like, because I feel like this deck is essentially, can be played essentially the same way that like an Annie deck. So you can just have 1 Vi and ride the wins to just completely out of the blue finish the game if you happen to get this combo. And Draven gets a lot of cards potentially, right? So you don't need to like dig for it. It can be an accident. Now this Rumble deck that took the top 8 as well here, you have to ask, what's the point of playing Rumble over Kai'Sa? And the only reason would be, well, I do play the blue Rumble as a leader, right? And also have access to essentially a more consistent Bragneck mech. Is that big enough argument to use Rumble instead of Kai'Sa? Probably not, because the problem with Rumble is that your beneficial like shield keyword from your legend to your units only is active when you're defending on the battlefield. And in current metagame, defending on the battlefield is not the easiest, specifically also because Dravens are they want to fight you, right? So you're giving them that chance if you want to get value. And if you want to defeat Dravens, you have to play more out of your base to essentially not allow them to get the draw, and just kind of play like the game where you give them points, but you try to race them at some point because they don't have the time to even use those cards that will draw at some point, right? So I'm not a fan of this Rumble, bro, and I feel like there's no reason to play Rumble if you want to even play mechs, so you should be playing Kai'Sa. But hey, kudos to him for taking the top 8. We have seen already a Rek'Sai that played Immortal Phoenixes. This one is a little bit more standard, but still a very, very, very aggressive deck that plays the Under Titans as the, you know, payoff from revealing your deck, essentially, right? You have the Seals of Rage, you have the removal in form of Hidden Blade, Calderweak, and Piercing Lights, and you are just trying to overwhelm your opponents with an onslaught of creatures. Now, because this player recognizes that he wants to get points as soon as possible, he also plays two main deck Dravens from the first set, the Showboats. Now, I'm not sure why that's against the odds over here in this particular like main deck. I don't know. Maybe there should be Cleaves, but who the hell knows. Anyway, it is a full casino deck. This deck feels great when it works, and it feels awful when it doesn't, and I feel like that's one of the most inconsistent decks that you can play. It's like a B tier, like maybe even lower B tier, but it's definitely fun to play. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I have never played Renata. I have no idea if this is a good deck. It also plays two Gearheads, which I think are horrible cards. So it does play, of course, Jace and the Vanguard Armory as your main win condition at some point. Sorry for that. And also Hostile Takeovers, which are one of the best signature cards in the game. But it doesn't play Overachiever to play it for free, essentially, from hand when you're attacking, which is, I don't know. I feel like you could do that, you know? It's like, it's such a powerful card. Why not just use the another potential win button, which is Overachiever plus Hostile Takeover, to just completely blow your opponents out of the water, right? But other than that, F-Grips over here, there's a lot of removal, there's Zero Drive, another win condition potentially. Ward Atlas, I'm not sure what's happening here, man. Like, it's really a weird deck, and I just wanted to show you this. I'm not gonna try to act like an expert in telling you if this is a good deck or not, but most likely. Now we're jumping to Shanghai City Challenge with 128 players, so maxed out. The top 8 was as follows. We have Draven, On, Draven, Irelia, Annie, Irelia, Kaisa, and Ari for the first time in the top 8 of those city challenges. Just gonna show you the first place Draven, absolutely uninteresting. The second place On is a typical El Presidente deck, but it has 3 times Tiana Krongard, which is, I wanted to say weird, but I don't know. I also didn't have the chance yet to play with an On type of deck like this, but it just, like, literally the only win condition you have here is build a big tank, which is the On, and either travel through both locations with Shurelia's Requiem, right? Because you get ganking, and try to get from 6 to 8 this way, or just multiple times. And other win condition would be, I'm just setting up a big tank on my field, and then I play Tiana Krongard and try to defend it with all the counter spells to not get killed by some kind of removal. And I'm gonna try to use Guardian Angels for her, and Doran's Shield, and anything else to increase her might. It is very weird deck. I am not certain how this handles like all the pressure from the aggro decks, right? But it doesn't look like it can, but somehow it got a second place out of a 128, but it did lose to the Draven from the first place. I don't know how decisively, but I can guess that rebukes are a big problem for this deck. So you have to have your not so fast and wind walls ready for those rebukes. The Annie deck from the top 8 is more or less set 1 Annie with just small upgrades like the Piercing Lights and essentially long swords to make a cosplay of a Draven, but it still does play the Vise and the Ride the Wind combo in the timelines to play against the, I guess, Auto Dravens, which are drawing a lot of cards, right? So there's a possibility of using that, as well against the Ezreals to just discard their hands. But overall, it's probably just still very good. It doesn't have the Scouts though, so there's no way of getting 3 points with it on turn 2, but that's, or turn 1 even, right, if you're going second. But other than that, it's just more or less a standard Annie. Quickly wanted to show you the top 8 Kaisa, which is a mech deck essentially. You have the Game Jammers, Forecasters, and then you play a full set of Production Surge and Noxus Hopeful. I would maybe consider putting 1 Poro into a Game Jammer to make the second turn more possible to do a Production Surge into Hopeful, because that is like insane, right? But other than that, this is probably how would you would like to play a Mech Kaisa, with 2 Bring Here's as well to play around the purple decks, right? But I still think the Ferrous Forerunners might be just a bad call in current metagame. Maybe there should be a different card. Maybe there should be just like additional Darius and maybe just play 2 Ferrous Foreigns. That would be a better choice. Other than that, pretty standard Kai'Sa. But I feel like if you want to play a mech Kai'Sa, this is the direction you want to take. And here we have, for the first time, an Ahri in the top 8. Now, the win condition here is mostly time warps. You are playing like a lot of production of gold. We have plundering poros, we have card shops, right? So we want to get as much value as possible out of the gold to get to the time warps, that you play 2 of them in main. And here we have Irelias as well, the green ones that have deflect and can get +1 for being chosen. I'm not sure how much this matters. Maybe this should be just the Navori's card, which is a 4-drop with deflect, which is the main point of having this card right here. I think so. But other than that, it's a very interesting deck. It plays differently than other decks because of how he wants to hold locations, but at the same time you have additional like win conditions of the Twonks, the time orbs. Like this is really cool. It's really cool. Very nice to see someone top 8ing with this, even though it's a, you know, best of 1 event, but it's very promising for the future. Maybe Ahri at some point will be somewhat a threat. We'll see. The Zhongshan City Challenge had a top 8 that was being won by a Kai'Sa deck, followed up by Irelia, Sivir, Annie, 2 Dravens, and a Jinx in the top 8. The first place Kai'Sa is a very standard Kai'Sa, like even from set 1's perspective. It does have the Piercing Light in the main as additional copy of a Falling Star, 2 Icathian Reigns, there's 2 Time Warps as well, and you just try to get to the point to play them essentially, right? We have Void Gate as one of the locations to improve the breaking points, which makes sense with the current meta game where there's so many 4 health creatures, right? Which also allows Piercing Light to kill the 5 drops as well, which is very important too. But overall, it's better to have that 4 damage on Void Gate when you play against Kai'Sas and Dravens and so on. So as well, 3 retreats in this deck to get faster to the time warp, and no production surge. I'm assuming because of the fact that you just don't play that many mechs, even as a 2-drop, right? There are not any of them, and you want to play that retreat on as many units as possible, specifically on Lecturing Yordle, which essentially allows you to get to the point where you have more cards and you can just play the longer game with the Icathian Reigns and Time Warp. The Irelia from the second place is sporting a version with more 2-drops, so it's not the El Presidente version, right? You have the ability to get more value out of Power and Treasure Hunter over here, but it also plays 3 Jaxes, which is a newer addition that I don't think seen anything anywhere else. And Jaxes are pretty cool because not only they're hard to remove because of the deflect, but it also allows you to play all of your equipment in quick draw fashion. So makes Brutalizer incredibly powerful, on par essentially with the spinning axis from Draven, and a quick draw Guardian Angel is incredibly powerful, right? So that's pretty cool. Other than that, pretty standard Irelia. The third place Sivir is also an Aurora deck, which seems like they're gaining in popularity in China over here instead of the MF's version, but this one plays 1 more Deadbloom Predator than the previous one we talked about, and also does have Boots of Swiftness, which are solving the problem of the ganking, right? So pretty cool to see like an updated version over here, and it does play 1 less right because of the Boots of Swiftness, and also 2 Treasure Troves. I wonder what's that about. But overall, still the question is this better than MF? And I have no answer. I don't have any experience with this Sivir deck, but it does maybe make it a little bit more consistent because of the Treasure Trove and the Cold Shot potential of digging through your deck. The 4th place Annie, I have some personal like feelings about this deck because it's very similar to the deck that I was testing on stream. It's a Vax Annie. Essentially, you have like your the same way that you played with Vi before. I was playing 1 Vi, this deck is playing 2, but you're just trying to have a lot of card draw with the new Ezreal, with the, well, he doesn't play Scrapsies, I did. Anyway, the point is, you want to dig through your deck, of course, to get into the position where you can just play Vi Ride the Wind, but also Vex is incredibly powerful when she is actually on the battlefield and allows you to play the Ride the Wind for like 1 mana and no other investment. Like you can play Rebuke for 1 mana and 1 purple. Like all of those spells just become incredibly oppressive. So does like the Cold Shot is just incredibly cheap. So Vex, I feel like, benefits the most out of a potential Annie deck because you're packing your deck with your spells that you're gonna utilize with Annie anyway, and then Vex just completely breaks the math on everything. And you still have the potential auto finisher in Vi Ride the Wind, right? So all of the early game stays the same, but you finish it in another pretty different fashion. But right to win is your win condition. That's essentially how you want to win. Typically to win during your opponent's turn and then withholding one of the locations. So there's a lot of tricks involved. It doesn't seem like the game can be won at some point and then suddenly you win. So it's a pretty cool deck. I'm not sure if I like this version more than mine, but I'll share mine at some point as well. And now the 8th place Jinx for the first time ever. And I don't know, man. This is, you can literally play this deck as a Draven. Like, crazy stuff, 5 seals, 2 of Discord, 3 of Rage, and this is probably the reason why you play Jinx, because you you want to empty your hand a little bit faster. But really, you could legit take this entire deck without changing single card apart from the Jinx champion unit instead of swapping into a Draven, and you could play this reliably into Draven and probably have better results, which is very sad for Jinx's fans. And also I think Riot dropped the ball, because an arcane character, a main character like Jinx, should be giga playable. But congrats on the top 8. Not a single signature spell in the main board, by the way, 2 in sideboard. That also tells you a lot. Like, hopefully we can get another Jinx in the future set. Harbin sit-in challenge is 64 players. We had 1, 2, 3, 4 Dravens in the top 8, 2 Kaisas, a Fiora, and a Victor. Let's check out the winning Draven over here. So the Draven is more or less very standard, apart from having 3 Teemos in the main, and that's about it. The Fiora from the top 4 is pretty promising, I would say. I really like the fact that this person is playing 2 actions main to benefit from the equipment, but also have a counter to opponent's equipment in the main, right? We have a Death Grip. I'm not sure, again, like why, just potentially to maybe get a value out of Unsung Hero when you want it. Other than that, there is Kiana over here, which I like because you kind of need card draw in the orange-yellow when you typically don't have access to much. That's why you supplement it with the locations as well, right? All of the locations here are to draw cards, and this is like a good understanding of what is the problem with Fiora. So kudos to this player building this deck. I feel like this is pretty neatly done. It makes sense. Most of the cards here are in weird ratios, but they do kind of make sense when you start thinking about this deck. Although the one thing I don't like is the 3-drop Fiora, which is here in 3, which I find kind of odd, which I don't know, maybe I would just personal opinion, but I would prefer to have the 4-drop Fiora instead of one of those as well. I understand that the 3-drop Fiora is important to finish the game because you kind of have to get ready, right? So it is very important, but 3 might be a little bit an overkill. But overall, I feel like Fiora might be a contender. It might not be a tier A deck, but like a high B tier, maybe low A tier. So it is nice to see the progress in deck building of this deck. And then on the top 8, we also have a Victor deck that is a very standard set 1, just updated with a little bit newer units. But it still has Daring Poros, by the way, 2 of them, which makes you wonder, like, okay, you prefer the yellow Poros instead of the gold Poros, which means you just want to go over the potential 2 drops that your opponents will have if you go second, right? So, I don't know. It's kind of interesting. It does play the wide array of removal, but it doesn't play Bellows Breath, even though it plays 2 Imperious Decree, which is questionable, I would say. But other than that, it has all the standard units that you would like to see, in addition to Card Shop and Zhengzhou, and 1 Darius Executioner. Not sure, like, I understand it has some synergy, but I'm not sure how important this card is overall in this deck. But this is like a very standardish tier set 1 Victor updated to set 2. That's gonna be it for today. I don't even know how long this video was, but it's definitely the longest video on my channel, I think. If it is, tell me in the reply. If you watch the entire video, right, you say, my god, that's the longest video you have on your channel, even if it's a lie. Bye bye, see you next time.